Hello and welcome to Retropower Uncut episode 81 and unusually I'm outside because for the first time in a long while the weather's actually half decent. A lot of people ask about what our own cars are and what we drive, and I guess at some point we'll do an episode about that. But as it happens, this is here at the moment. This is mine. It's a 1976 RA28 Toyota Celica liftback. Which has more, as you can probably see, has more than a little bit of Mustang fastback influence in it. I've had this I think 3 years now. It's more or less completely standard, you'd probably be surprised to know, apart from the wheels, and I haven't got a great deal of plans for it other than I'm going to drop the ride height slightly on the front just to level it out a bit. But it's actually here because the brake caliper, I hadn't used it for that long that the brake calipers, or one of the front calipers, had seized up. So I've had the brakes off it, I'm just having the calipers rebuilt at the minute. And then hopefully, if the weather continues to be like this, I'll actually get some miles on it this year. It's only done, I think it's 30-something thousand, 34,000 miles. And it is more or less all original. It's had an exterior paint job before I got it, which is pretty reasonable, it's not perfect. But other than that, the underside's completely unrestored, the engine bay is still the original paint, unrestored, all the interior is original. So yeah, it's a car that we got basically because just love the look of it, and that's what it comes down to. They're pretty nicely engineered. They stole a lot of sort of stuff from Ford at the time, so there's a lot of Mark II Escort copying going on with it. The front strut design is more or less as you'd get on an Escort. It's coil sprung on the back, not like the Escort, so it's on trailing arm, live axle coil springs. It's just a nice car. They're just, as with Japanese cars of almost all eras, it just starts on the button, can cruise around in it, perfectly comfortable. I've been to Goodwood in it a couple of times, and you can just cruise at sort of the motorway speed limit, or maybe a little bit more, and it just loves munching miles, which is surprising for a sort of car that was never really a long distance cruiser. It just chomps the miles quite nicely in comfort. So yeah, that's one of mine. We'll perhaps do a more detailed episode at some point on that. One of the reasons I was able to bring that in to work, which is a rare occurrence, is because the Mark II Escort left us. So the orange Escort, I had the final trauma job of putting the stripes on it, but that left us last week, which gave me the opportunity to bring my car in last weekend and do that job I need to do on the brakes. Utah, I'm very much in the shakedown, taking it out, coming back, rectifying issues. I did a little drive last week, and it's the first time I've done a bit more of an enthusiastic drive, doing a lot of gear changes, and immediately ran into a problem with the clutch. It started slipping, and I was absolutely convinced there's no way that the clutch would be slipping for any reason other than an actuation issue. And very quickly found the problem. Not surprisingly, it was bad quality aftermarket parts. So the symptoms were the clutch started slipping, and I thought it's got to be that it's being held off somehow, as in like it's being held partially disengaged even when the pedal's not pressed. So I took the slave cylinder off, and sure enough, you couldn't push the slave cylinder back in, the piston on the slave cylinder back in. So there was something stopping the fluid returning back to the reservoir when you release the pedal. So each time I pressed the clutch, it was pumping it more and more up, and there must have been a tiny amount of fluid being let back into the reservoir, but not very much. So if you left it quite a long while, it was okay. If you did a lot of gear changes, it started to slip the clutch. So I actually took the clutch master cylinder off, had a look at that, and we've used like a Mark II Jaguar original cylinder just because it looks very nice with this sort of fabricated tin reservoir. But yeah, sure enough, with the clutch released, there was no fluid passing from the cylinder back to the reservoir. And I thought initially it might be the piston not retracting far enough and the seal staying over the little orifice between the two. But it wasn't. It was literally that hole between the cylinder and the reservoir was not passing fluid through it for some reason. Because it's all fabricated into that reservoir, you can't really get in to see what the blockage is. But it was either not properly drilled or had swarf in it or something, some kind of manufacturing defect. So I've swapped that for another replacement, probably made by exactly the same people, but this one doesn't seem to have the problem. So back on with mileage on this now. Mustang. we are homing in on first fire up. Actually, that's what Adam's working on at the minute. So he's just topping up fluids. We've got transmission oil in it now. He's just been bleeding the brakes. We've got coolant in it. We've got engine oil in it. We've just got to get an adapter. Whenever we do a first fire up on a car, we like to put a mechanical oil pressure gauge on it and crank the engine with the plugs out to start with, just to build up oil pressure. And we've just realised that it's an odd thread on the sender port on the engine. I think it's quarter MPT, and our gauge is 1/8 MPT, so we've just got to get an adapter for that. Then we'll be into cranking it for oil pressure, and then just quick check of the timing, we should be able to fire that up. So that's be a big step forward on this. And also I've been on with the headlining, which was kind of the keystone to them being able to assemble a lot more interior components on that. So yeah, the headlining is one of those jobs that I think it's one of the few jobs that now only I'm entrusted to. So it's more patience than anything else. It's not that it's particularly difficult to do to get it right. It's just you've got to take a lot of time over it. Lots of pinning it, clipping it all out, stretching it all out, getting it all into place and being 100% happy with it all before you start gluing it around the flanges. So the key really is just in getting it all stretched out and doing those high peril slices with the blade into the corners and making sure you don't go too far and end up with a bit of cut you then see afterwards. But you do tend to have to do quite a lot of cuts in it even before you start gluing, because it won't conform to the corners properly to get it all clipped into place otherwise. But I'm happy with how that's gone. So we can start on the next phases of the interior now. We're going to get these seals fitted around here, which we were waiting until last week for a metal trim that holds them in place, which we finally managed to get. And then we'll be able to do the adjustment of the door and rear quarter glass. And then with that done, we can put all the rest of the seals in, fully build the doors up, and then we're going to be moving on to interior build up in that. And speaking of first fire-ups on V8s, lurking out of shot over there under a cover is the Manta. And we also did first fire-up on that. It seems like first fire-up city at the minute. It's like loads of cars all came together at once. People viewing probably noticed that last year we didn't seem to finish many cars, and I think it's going to be the opposite. This year we're going to finish tons. We first fired up the VR6 a couple of weeks ago, the Manta last week. What was it, even early this week, and then probably this one this week. I'm trying to think whether there's anything else in that line. I don't think there is, but it seems like a lot of things coming to completion at once. So yeah, Manta fire up went really well. Cranked it, got oil pressure. We had the timing 180 out to start with, but flicked that round, got that sorted. And yeah, it fired up really well. No good oil pressure, temperature's all good. Just sat there burbling away nicely. So very happy with how that's gone. I think the only real hiccup on that was that there is again, aftermarket parts. The Mocal oil filter housing, it's got a remote oil filter on it. There's what appears to be a bit of porosity in the casting, so it was actually leaking out through the body of the cast part of the filter housing. So it's actually in the bit that it's optionally drilled to put a temperature sensor in. Now we were going to put the temperature sensor in the sump plug, but I think what we might do is just drill through the bit where it's porous, tap it and put the temp probe in there, and that kills two birds with one stone, because it's actually probably nicer to have it in there than in the sump plug, because it means you haven't got to disconnect the temp sensor whenever you take the sump plug out. So yeah, good. Morris. So we've been on with basically panel fit up. I don't think I had the doors on last week, and I definitely didn't have the wings on, so I went ahead and got the doors fitted up, got all those adjusted in the line, got the latches on. If you remember from the metalwork stage, it's running mini door latches on this, just to give it a better quality latch that's got external moving parts, so we can do remote central locking onto it. So I got those on and aligned, and then a couple of days later, the wings. We've got these rubber gaskets running around there, so there's a bit of time involved in getting the positioning of those really nice, so they just sit nicely there. Front wings on, got the slam panel on. Really wanted to just get that in there just to make sure the inner wing alignment was all good on it. And then John has started cracking on with the plumbing work. So we've got the fuel pump and filter into its cradle, and that's mounted up underneath. we tackled a lot of all the component mounting was tackled whilst it was bare metal. So Stu had already made the pump cradle and had all the fasteners ready for that. So they'd already been Xylan coated. The cradle had already been powder coated. So it's now mainly just assembling components together. So we've got the pump and filter in there. We've got the remote servo mounted in the back here, which we'd already made the brackets for. The pedal box is going in, which again, we'd already done all the mounting work for that when it was bare metal. And we're just going through making up all the lines. So John's been doing the lines in the back between the remote servo and the bulkhead fittings, the lines in the front between the master cylinders and the bulkhead fittings at the front. He's then going to be making up the lines that run under the car and clipping all those into place, and just working through mechanical stuff. We're not going to go too far with any trim related stuff because we've still got to do the wet sanding and polishing on the paintwork. But we figured it was a good opportunity at this stage to just make some headway on the mechanical side of things. So that is progressing nicely. Trying to think what else we've been on with. Actually, there's a bit of E-Type work. George has been working on the rear end design for the E-Type. So I think we showed last week doing the 3D scan work for that. We've now moved on to modelling the Valance. So the first job really was to check the symmetricality of the original shape. We knew it probably wasn't going to be quite right, and we've only got that rear panel repair panel tacked in for the purposes of getting the shape roughly right. So what we did was took a profile from the 3D scan, mirrored it to check how they were side to side, which not surprisingly they were not symmetrical. It's about 15mm different one side to the other. So we've basically taken an average, erring on the side of the one that's bigger on the basis that we can build out the smaller side to make it the same. And then we're in the process now of modelling the bumper to conform to that shape that we've determined, and modelling all of the rear valance shape. We're modelling the exhausts as well, so we can essentially assess the overall look of the back end. And we can actually send the customer, not only can get videos or pictures from ourselves, but also we can send a link to the CAD model that, even without having the CAD software, just via an internet browser, he can actually rotate the model in 3D and look at it from all different angles and make sure he's happy with how it all looks before we make anything. And then the plan will be, we're going to make a mock-up of the bumper in a profile, which will probably be machined out of something like MDF or ply. So we can then use that to build the metalwork to the right shape on the car when we do the final metalwork on the rear for the upper part. So we know when we get that bumper machined from aluminium, it'll be a perfect fit. And then the lower valance, which is going to be a totally revised shape made in steel, from the CAD drawing will generate a load of profiles of the shape, which we can assemble together in a sort of almost like a three-dimensional puzzle of ply or MDF profiles, which we can then use as a buck to form the steel panel over. So that's will be the eventual result of the design work, is that we can assess it in 3D, make sure we're happy with the look, and then generate the profiles to make the buck to form the steel panel over. So that's where we're at with that. I think in terms of stuff in here, that's more or less it. Oh, apart from Land Cruiser. Now I didn't have a visual cue, which is why I was umming and ahhing, because everything's been cleared away now. But there's been quite a lot of different people working on Land Cruiser stuff. James has been stripping all the axles down. I think last week we were just pulling them off the chassis. He's now stripped them completely. They're just bare casings. Rich has masked them up ready for powder coat. So we basically make MDF blanks that bolt onto each side of the open part of the axle casing where the diff would go, and onto the ends of the shaft holes, so that any faces that are machine faces, or anywhere you don't want to get grit, are completely masked off. So that's all been done ready, so they can be powder coat, blasted, zinc metal sprayed, powder coated. We've disassembled the leaf springs. We're actually using the original leaf springs on the basis that the originals are probably going to be better quality than aftermarket ones. They've been stripped down with Xylan coating those, and then they'll be built back up again afterwards. All the fasteners have been organised and blasted, ready for either zinc plate or Xylan. The shafts have been stripped out. We've started to list all of the replacement parts for the axle rebuilds. The diffs have been inspected. They're actually really good in terms of crown wheel and pinion wear. So we're going to do new bearings and seals in them. But other than that, the crown wheels and pinions can stay original. And then Adam is doing the engine strip down. So it's a 1UZ Lexus V8, really nicely designed engine. Thankfully, really minimal wear. The bores are virtually like new on it. So we're just in the process of stripping everything down. The heads are now down to the bare castings, the block's down to the bare casting. We've got a chemical dip that we'll decarbonise those with, and then the castings, once they're decarbonised, are going to go away and be dry ice blasted, which we tend to do on head castings, because although you get a nice finish with bead blasting, the beauty of the dry ice blasting, although it's not very aggressive, it doesn't really clear off anything, any sort of carbony deposits or corrosion, it doesn't really clean off. But as long as it's a good casting and it only needs to sort of strip off dirt that doesn't come off with a pressure washer, dry ice is quite good because it doesn't get any, there's no physical bead there. As soon as the ice has hit the thing, it turns to gas, turns to carbon dioxide. So there's no risk of getting any debris down inside any oil bays or anything like that, which makes it really well suited to that. So we're just about to dry ice blast the head castings. I'm not sure if the plan is to do the block that way as well. And then we've got loads of new parts coming for the engine, so all the rebuild parts are coming. So we're going to do that rebuild in-house. So we'll cover that over the course of the next couple of weeks. That's where we're at with the Land Cruiser, and I'll hand you over to Nat, who will take you through what's going on in the metal shop. That's it from me. I'll see you next week. Right, well, hello folks, and thank you, Cal, for handing over. And here we are for another week in the fabrication shop. You can hear fabrication going on in the background, which is always exciting. Tom's busy welding over there. We'll have a look at what he's up to in a minute, but we're going to start off with here. Stu's gone home. He finishes a bit earlier than Tom does, so we're in peace over here now with Stu's handiwork. And yeah, Stu's main basically roof this week. It's been roof progress. And we're perilously close to having got the roof done now. He's done an absolutely stunning job of making this rear section here. There's a bit of to-ing and fro-ing on the best way to achieve that area. There were, if you remember seeing this window aperture before this was done, we'd obviously cut and altered the angle of the roof and altered the angle of the rear window. And it meant that there was a section of roof still attached to this window aperture, and then the rest of the roof here, and then a gap. And basically the rear of the roof needed extending at a new angle to meet the window aperture. And there were various ways of doing that, but it was looking for the cleanest, neatest way of doing it. Originally we were going to split the roof just around here and actually put the joint into the original roof skin. And we talked to Stu for a bit about it. We decided that actually the better way to do it would be to make the full return all the way into the original rear window return around here. And it is a much better way of doing it, to do it that way. It's a much cleaner solution. But it's quite a complicated shape to make. Now, it would be possible to make that shape using the Pullmax nibbler over my right shoulder there. However, it's very hard to get the curvature exactly correct on that. The curvature kind of is quite hard to control on the Pullmax. So rather than putting it on that, Stu's actually put a split line in on the second step and done this in two halves and put a weld joint through the middle of it. So he's got a bit of control over the curvature, because he can control the curvature on one half, then the other half, leave it slightly too tight, then weld it, which tends to pull it straight. So he's done that. And that's enabled him to get the curvature in both planes, the curvature that way with the rear window and the curvature that way with the roof. And that's all come up really nicely. So that's all clamped in place now. So that's very close. Obviously the C-pillars are done, the lower section's welded. So now he's in a position where he's pretty close to being able to get the main weld done to the roof. So now that's all clamped on, he needed to then support the roof. Now, one of the problems there was that the original roof skin on these wasn't the position it sort of naturally sprang to wasn't completely symmetrical. It had actually gone slightly over to one side. That's kind of just how they are, I think. So it needed supporting so it stayed central and that the curvature remained even both sides and symmetrical. So he's made a half template here. Play some golf or some sort of something with that, maybe hockey, shinty stick. He's made a little stick and used that and basically fiddled around comparing one side of the roof to the other and working out a mean position, a mean curvature which the roof would average out to. Once he'd done that and worked out that mean curvature, he's then created, which you may or may not be able to see, but I'm sure Jamie's got some footage of it, he's created on the inside a curved sheet steel former with a return flange on it, which is exactly that symmetrical profile, the one he determined by finding the average for the roof skin. And he's then got that pushed up inside the roof with the roof frame held in place and a little ratchet jack pushed up against that, which then holds that into the roof skin and makes the roof skin sit with the correct curvature and sit symmetrical. Which then he's then finished the shaping on this to follow that exact profile. That's now sat on top. So the next step he's going to do, which we'll be on with tomorrow, will be scribing out this to the roof to scribe out the cut line, cutting the roof to the scribe line, and then he'll be able to drop this in, and then that will be very, very close to a position where it's able to be welded in. He's welded the front of the roof and metal finished that, where, as you may recall from previous episodes, we split the roof at the front to enable us to re-rake it. But the split was only very slight and the change in angle was incredibly slight, so that it could be lost very easily in panel beating. So we split that, dropped the roof angle, and then re-welded that split line, which is now done, and then that's all been planished out and flattened out. He's very frustrated there in that he hadn't actually taken all the filler off the roof. We didn't know there was any filler in the roof. He hadn't completely stripped it all to bare metal. He stripped a band around that weld line, and frustratingly, then hadn't thought it was all fine. Did the weld,
during the panel beating, stripped a little bit more paint off, found a pre-existing filled dent in the roof in the band that he was having to panel beat. As it is, he's managed to get that dent out as well. It's one of those things. We should have stripped the whole roof. We didn't at the time. There we go. We need to paint strip of the roof once all this is done, but we would tend to do that later on at the point where we do the reblast and zinc metal spray of the car after all the metal work. At that point, we'd then do the paint strip and clean the roof as well. It's just how the way things are panned out. So yeah, that's where the roof's at. Watch this space. There'll be progress next week in that I think we should, all being well, fingers crossed, a bit of luck and no disasters, the roof should all be finished, welded and panel beat for next week, and then it'll be onto the rear quarters both sides and making the other half of both rear quarters. So it's pretty exciting times because a beautiful shape of car is kind of taking place before our eyes now. So it's really nice for us to watch. So hopefully it's nice for you guys to watch as well, because it's really enjoyable to see this one taking shape. And we'll wander on this way. I'm going to run around here past a Paulie Hoover. Rich has been mending that. We've had a bit of a switch failure in Trusty Hoover. We'll wander on around here. And we'll come all the way around here. This looks a sensible place. I'm going to lean on some scaffolding on a Mark 1 Escort. As you may be able to notice, there's quite a lot of fabrication going on around this. We have been working out how to do all the panel work we've got to do and working out the best order in which to do all the panel work on this. We think we've got the plan pretty well. I'd be very interested if anybody's got any photographs from Halewood plant or any video from late 60s Halewood plant building Mark 1 Escorts. If anybody's got any photographs or video from the body build line there showing any of the bodies being constructed, because I'm quite intrigued on the order of construction. I think we've got a pretty good theory about how these were constructed based on where there are and aren't welds and how those welds are carried out. But I'd be interested in knowing, because it's not the most immediately obvious method of constructing this type of body that I suspect that Ford has used. But I suspect they've used it for a reason of giving themselves control over a length tolerance. But I'd be interested to hear any inputs, and if I don't get any input next week, I'll give my thoughts on how I think they slotted these bodies together. But that's the interesting point. I think they did literally kind of slot the body shell together in two halves after they put the panels, after they built two key sub-assemblies. But I'll be interested to see if there's any footage around, because I can't find any, but there must be some somewhere. So if anybody's got any, let me know. Anyway, onto this. We have now made little fixtures for the screen apertures. That just saves tape measure time later on. When we change the roof skin and we change the scuttle, obviously we're going to have a frame, but we do want to know where these edges are precisely, and that can be done with a tape measure and lots of measuring, or it can be done by making a fixture that touches the inner flange and also the outer flange point where the seal sits, which all these points here do. Then they'll clamp in, then we can literally, when we come to put these panels together with the inner frame still in place, because we're keeping that section, the inner frame here and the dash here will be kept. So the fixtures will still drop in, then we can put the panels in, drop the fixtures back in, clamp up, and we know if they fit, the apertures are good. We've got that on the front and rear apertures. We've also got one in the boot aperture, and again, that means that when we do the quarter panels, well, body sides actually, not really quarters, it's a full body side we're changing. That when we do that, we know that we've got the lines correct on the back, because one at a time we'll be taking one side off. The fixture jig will hold the quarter panel flange, which forms the side gutter of the boot opening. So we'll be able to hold that in place with that fixture. Then when we do the other side, exactly the same. When we do the rear panel, exactly the same. It'll be held by the other three sides each time, and we're not changing the rear window scuttle section and the top gutter section. That's staying original. It's one of the few bits of original metal that's staying. So that bit, basically that fixture jig will allow us to change those sections one at a time and not lose our references. Obviously we've built a lot of sections, a lot of very, very robust towers from our select jig bench, which are picking up the key suspension points, the front rail anchorages, the strut top positions, the front crossmember positions, 4 positions under the original datum points on the chassis rails with pins that go into the holes in the chassis rails underneath, the front of the rear leaf spring hangers, which are a key datum point, and then the rear of the rear leaf spring hangers are all picked up on there. And then I've built these 2 gantries which bolt onto the jig. These bolt on, these are sub-assemblies which bolt onto these flat plates here, which are all threaded, and they bolt on. Then these two beams then also bolt into these gantries. These beams, this one will be, we're calling it a lot of spragging. This one is, it picks up here. We're also going to pick up further down the windscreen pillar there. We've also got to pick up on this gantry there. We've got a pickup on the door catch there. We've got 2 pickups on the sill and a pickup on the A-post there. That basically means we can clamp the full aperture in shape, which means that when we remove the internal parts of the car, we can clamp to the outs. When we put the new floor in, for example, we can clamp that to the outer sill and to this jig to make sure that's in the right place and nothing can move. If the sill flexes, it won't be in the wrong place. And it also means that when we replace the body side, because we're going to replace the body side from A-post here, originally this was one pressing from here in the A-post all the way, the outside of the A-post inside the gutter, all the way down the sill. All of this whole quarter panel is one pressing originally. Now it's 2, it's now split. The Magnum panels have a split just ahead of the B-post because otherwise it's a huge panel, you can't ship it anywhere because it'll be ruined, and I imagine the press that it was used to press it isn't big enough. So it was done as a split panel there and there, so we can then basically offer the panels onto the car, clamp them all in place, get the alignment, tack weld those, then we'll take it off the car, we'll put a brazed joint in on those 2 points, metal finish that brazed joint, and then we have an original single piece body side as per an original MK1 Escort. That can go on then exactly as it did at Ford. Possibly with one exception in the area of the pillar, but we'll deal with that later when I've sussed a bit more out there. But basically that's the full body side goes on. Then we can use this jig to hold all of the door aperture in position, and then these 2 mounts here give me my door hinge positions, so we can set the door hinges roughly in place. These were welded from the inside on the original car build, as far as I'm aware, unless somebody's going to correct me now. These were actually welded from the inside of the pillar in situ with the body side on the car, as far as I'm aware, to make sure there was I presume, without any accurate pictures, there was a fixture used to hold the hinges in place relative to the door aperture, and then the welds were formed. Certainly there's weld access from the inside being built into the pillars, and the welds definitely have been done from the inside. The only reason for doing that would be if they were done in situ. So that's the assumption I've made there. Doing it this way means I can do the same, then we can get them tacked. We can then unbolt these fixtures, pull them off, put the door on, check the door fit. If we're happy with the door fit, we'll take it back off, put the fixture back on, then fully weld the hinges. So the hinge positions are good because they're one of the key things. Obviously on a Mark II Escort, they became bolt-on hinges, and it's a lot easier because you've got adjustment. On the Mark I, the only adjustment is bending these, which is not the easiest, or cutting them off and welding them on in a different place if you got them horrendously wrong. So that's that. Then the engine bay, we built a bit of scaffolding in here, which picks up off the bonnet hinges, the strut tops, gives us a rough clamping location on the front of the inner wing, just to give us a bit of alignment there. It's not that precise there. We're going to work from a centre line there, and then we're going to use, once we've got it approximate, we're going to get the bonnet on, and we'll do a trial fit of the bonnet to make sure everything's correct there. And obviously we've got to trial that in tandem with the wings. So there's a bit more jiggery pokery, if you like. There's a bit more messing around there to make sure everything lines up. But all the key structural points, obviously when we put the new rails in, the rails will simply be bolted to the jig from front to where they socket into the rear rail section at the back. They'll be bolted to the jig, and then we can build up from those. We can put the inner wings to, then we can get that lined up and bolted onto the fixtures. Then we can put the bulkhead in, lower bulkhead in, and so on. We can build up from there with everything bolted solid to the jig. So we've got enough datums then that we know that everything's going to end up in the right place. So we're very, very close. I was hoping by today to be starting to cut this up, as in the body shell. We're not quite there because I've realised I wanted some more fixture points in the door apertures. So we've got about 3 more fixture points to put in each side, which will be tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow afternoon we should be making the first incisions, pretty significant incisions, because it's pretty much floor pan, bulkhead, scuttle, inner wings, chassis rails, front end, completely gone. There'll be basically nothing, basically from the dashboard down and forward of the rear seat, there'll be nothing. That's all coming straight off in one hit. There's no point trying to do that piecemeal. That's all just going to go, and then the new lot be fixtured in. So yes, there'll be some exciting progress next week on that one. So yeah, watch this space for a MK1 Escort being dismantled and dismembered and rebuilt. And then we'll have a little dash here. I'll make Jamie reverse at a dangerous rate, and we'll have a little pop in. Here's Steve in the body prep area, and we've got Land Cruiser. undergoing sanding, the traditional sanding stage, but a little bit. It's quite nice really, because it's fairly small, fairly flat areas. I think after a lot of curvature work on the Morris, Gaz and Steve are probably quite enjoying working on something with some flat areas to sand for a change. Makes a pleasant difference in the job. So yeah, there's a bit of panel work going on in the background, quite a lot of work on here. I know that the rear quarters are pretty much getting there, aren't they really? They're pretty much there. They're probably going to be about ready for polyester. Looks like he's obviously gone for a skim on the dash at the minute. That shouldn't take too much work, I don't imagine. I imagine it's wavy but not horrendous. And yeah, so we're getting pretty close to the external filler work done. The seam sealer work's been done. Everything's sealed there. There's probably a few little nitpicks on that, but that's pretty much close to being done. So yeah, I imagine by next week there's going to be polyester going on to some of this, and also there is a huge number of panels. That's the bit. The aside to this is, although the body tub's very small, there's a huge area of panel work to go with it. So the prep on the panels will be running in tandem with this. The roof's actually leaning up over there. There's a fiberglass lid on the roof that's leaning up over there. The initial prep's been done on that, but obviously there'll be a chunk more to do on that. We blasted the frame for that last week. I think that was done in the video last week, and there's a bit more work to be done on that, and then that's got to be epoxied and prepped so that the top part of the roof can be fixed to it. So there's plenty of panel work to go on in parallel with the body tub. So the tub finishing won't be anywhere near the final job because of the amount of other work to do. But yeah, progressing at a pretty good rate, and nice to be working on something flat. So yeah, I think that probably is about where we're at on this side of things for this week. So yeah, hope everybody's enjoyed my little ramble, and yeah, see you again in a week's time.